Though we may not realize it, every day, in informal ways, we all prepare bibliographies of information. From our Rolodex listings of important business contacts to a hastily scratched list of house painters and their estimates. Whatever the need, we compile the resources necessary for a given task by making lists.
Yes, hello? Yes, I'm calling about your daycare center. I needed some information, please. What are your hours, first of all?
If you're trying to decide on a daycare center for your child, for example, most likely you would make a list of all the centers you're considering and also note the same kinds of information about each center you contact. You would write down the center's address and phone number, how much they charge, when they are open, and so forth. If you don't do this, you will have no way of remembering which center is which. And when it's time to start visiting places, you won't know which ones to see or where to find them. It's the same with the bibliography for a research paper. Before you start investigating what each book or article or film says about the topic you're exploring, make a list of all the resources available on that subject. If you do this, you'll be able to find each one easily without having to look it up over and over again every time you go to the library. You'll also want to put everything in the same place on your index card, so you'll be able to evaluate whether you have enough information to draw accurate conclusions about the subject you're studying. Research information can be categorized into 3 general classifications: overview material, focusing material, and supporting material. Overview material gives you a broad and very general idea of the topic you are investigating. General reference books, such as encyclopedias, provide good overview material. This kind of reference can give you key words and related subjects when looking up your topic. Overview materials are usually used as a guide to help frame your search. They are not specific enough to provide you with the kind of information you need to write your paper. At the next level is focusing material. This kind of resource gives you more specific information, which helps you locate the books and articles available. Focusing material includes indexes, such as the Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature, the Education Index, the Social Sciences Index, the New York Times Index, and so forth. Another kind of focusing material includes more specialized dictionaries and encyclopedias, like the Encyclopedia of Psychology, the New Grove Dictionary of Music, or the Dictionary of American History. You may not be aware of all the different kinds of indexes and specialized materials available on a given topic, so you may want to consult a reference librarian. For example, if you're looking up information on a person prominent in the field of business, but not necessarily a nationally known figure, chances are you won't find anything in the Reader's Guide. However, there are several more specific reference books which might list this person, such as the Business Periodical Index, the Wall Street Journal Index, and Who's Who in Finance and Industry. Your librarian can help you find those reference books which relate to your topic.
Just look up his name as a subject, go to Snyder, his last name.
Okay, so you can look up.
The last category of research information is supporting material. Supporting material consists of the specific articles, books, written interviews, correspondence, videotapes, photographs, and brochures available on a given topic. These are the resources you've compiled from looking in the various indexes. All of these resources are part of what is called secondary research. That is, you're getting your information secondhand from another person who has already researched the topic and written about it. Within secondary research, there are 2 types of resources, secondary and primary. Sound confusing? Here, let's take a look. Primary resources are books, articles, and other materials written by the actual researcher. For example, a book by Freud would be a primary resource. Secondary resources are those materials written about the researcher. So a book about Freud or his theories would be considered a secondary resource. Just as you have two types of resources, primary and secondary, so you have two types of research.
Hi, my name is Vicki and I'm here for an interview with Dr. Stone.
Yes, he's expecting you. Go right back.
Thanks.
Primary research could also be called going straight to the horse's mouth. That is, you interview firsthand the people who are most knowledgeable about your subject.
What I really wanted to know about today was, do you find that people come to your clinic related to stressful events that are outside their control, maybe divorce by a spouse?
This includes recognized authorities on the topic, such as psychologists, if you're writing about the behavior of people during a disaster, law enforcement officials, if you're interested in the handling of victims of crime. Some authors work almost exclusively as primary researchers.
So that there's been this feeling that if anyone were to sit down and look at an anthill long enough, a lifetime say, you would certainly be the world's leading authority on that kind of ant. And it's true of any area of knowledge, however large or small, that by going to the primary research, you are more apt to come up with something new. I recall that in writing my own Palmetto Country, Erskine Caldwell was the editor of the series. And I was quoting so much that he felt obliged to drop me a note saying to stop quoting and be your own authority. And of course, many scholars would take exception to going that far. But I think there's a happy medium somewhere along the line that one should do one's own research and to primary sources where possible.
When you begin to identify your primary sources and start looking up your supporting materials, then it's time to start compiling your bibliography. Creating a preliminary bibliography will help you narrow the focus of your subject and will allow you to adapt the subject to your particular interest. It also allows you to evaluate whether there is enough information available to help you write your paper. Your bibliography can help you arrive at a working thesis. Now, for compiling your preliminary bibliography, it is recommended that you use index cards rather than note paper or legal pad or little slips of paper. We suggest you use 3x5 index cards. Index cards are recommended for several reasons. First, you will find that they are more flexible than note paper. They allow you to order and reorder the arrangement of your notes. By using one card for each source you find on your subject, you'll be able to easily alphabetize your bibliography for the works cited page of your final paper. You can also add new resource listings without rewriting. As you look up information, remember to make a new card for each item you find which looks interesting and relevant to your topic. Bear in mind that these cards represent only possible sources for future reference. They may or may not prove to be useful later on, but you should write down every possibility. Each card you make should contain the following information. 1, the author's name. List the last name first. Next, the title. Third, list the publication information. And fourth, the library call number when you have one. Because books, magazines, and newspapers contain different information, we will treat each one separately. For books, list the author's name, last name first, as you see here. In the case of multiple authors and edited books, include the additional information. The title of the book is next, and then the publication information. For books, you need to include the publisher's name, city of publication, and the date. And finally, the call number. With magazines and journals, author's name is first, followed by the title of the article and the full name of the magazine or journal in which the article is found. You will find that some periodicals will have volume numbers, others will not. The volume number should be listed when you have one. Publication information for periodicals should also include the date of publication and the page number where the article can be found. You may not have a call number for a periodical. If you do, you should record it, of course. But if your library doesn't use call numbers on periodicals, you may want to note how the periodicals are arranged in the library. If call numbers are not used, they will probably be arranged alphabetically by title. For newspapers, record the author if there is one. If not, go on to the next item and list the title of the article. This will be the headline. Publication information then will include the name of the newspaper, as well as the date and city of publication. And don't forget the page number. If you located the newspaper article on microfilm, you should write down the reference information as well as other information which will help you locate it again. Some schools and certain academic disciplines require different types of documentation. We've followed the guidelines recommended by MLA, which stands for Modern Language Association in our examples. But psychology and some schools of education request the use of APA, which is the publication manual of the American Psychological Association. Be sure you consult the documentation guide recommended by your instructor for the proper format before you begin recording your references. Now, let's see how all this information applies to a real example. Suppose you have decided to write a paper on photojournalism. When you consult an encyclopedia and a dictionary, you learn that there are several other related terms which you may want to investigate, such as photography and journalism. You also learn that one of the early pioneers in the field included Margaret Bourke-White. This information gives you several key words to look up in the reference indexes. You can look up all the various synonyms for photojournalism, and you can look up the names of some of the early photojournalists, as well as those who are current. Next, you need to decide what kinds of indexes might list the information you're looking for. Obviously, the Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature will indicate which articles have been written about photojournalism in popular magazines and about specific photojournalists. But don't quit there. If you're writing about photojournalism as a profession, consult Business News Bank and the Business Periodical Index. If you're writing about the power of photojournalism and are curious about the impact of visual images, look at the Social Sciences and Humanities Index, or psychological or sociology abstracts for the location of specific articles. If you're writing on the history of photojournalism, you may want to locate the various books which have been written about and by the profession's early pioneers. So your focus will determine which resources you will choose. At this stage, do not take the time to read every article or book you find on the topic. Do, however, make a bibliography card for each reference which is relevant. For example, the Reader's Guide lists scores of articles on photojournalism, but there are only a few written about war photography. If that is the focus of your paper, then you will want to make a separate card on each of those articles. If your topic is the history of photojournalism, however, you will obviously select other articles from the Reader's Guide. First is the author's name, last name first. Next is the title of the article placed in quotation marks. American Photojournalism, Highlights of an Evolution. The title of the magazine, underlined, is next. Popular Photography. Then the date, January 1987. Finally, note the inclusive page numbers, pages 76 through 77. Prepare an index card for every resource you use. For a topic like photojournalism, locating resources for primary research, such as talking to a well-known photojournalist, is probably unrealistic. But you do have television program specials and perhaps tapes or films in your library which you can view, and segments of these interviews can be used for quotes. When you make up your bibliography card for a videotape or television program, follow much the same format as you do for articles and books. List the program writer first, or in the case of taught programs where the host of the program may write his or her own material, list the host.
Thank you for joining
Next,
us in our
list the name of the program.
The techniques of the Masters Video Conference Series. All of us
Then, list the company or network which produced the program.
ready for you, and I know you're going to.
You can see First of all, I do have the contact sheets here. I spend a lot of time looking at contact sheets. These are just fragments from them. But what I would do if, you know, I'm working out ideas, I take them, I frequently will fold them, and I would simply hold it up and think, well, gee, maybe that would go together. Rarely, believe me, do I know if it's going to work, but these are clues.
Finally, list the date of the broadcast, or in the case of a general information tape, the date it was produced.
As you can see, this photo is from Atlantic City, New Jersey. We've got one here from the Philippines Subic Naval Base, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil.
There are also other sources you may use for your primary research, such as interviewing local authorities. For example, if you're discussing the pros and cons of a career in photojournalism, you may want to talk to local newspaper photographers to find out how they prepared for a career in photojournalism and whether they would recommend the same route. Or if you want to write about the people who decide which photographs will be used for the news stories, you could find someone in your area who is a news or sports editor and interview him. Even when your source is a personal interview, you should still prepare a bibliography card on that person. List the name of the individual as well as the date and location of the interview. If you are given any pamphlets or brochures, list each one on a separate 3x5 card. Remember that writing a bibliography is an ongoing process. As you begin to read through your research information, you may come across additional sources which will be helpful to your report. Also note those sources on a new index card for later reference. Once you have found ample material on your subject and start reading through the literature, you'll begin to form certain opinions on the topic at hand. This leads us to step 4 in the process of writing a research paper, stating your objective as a thesis. A thesis is a statement of the main point in your paper. It is a single sentence which directs the reader to the central idea. It is the most important single sentence in your report. If you were asked to sum up today's lesson in one sentence, what would you say? Well, it's about how to research information and prepare a bibliography. That's it, in a nutshell. While a thesis is, in essence, a summary of what your paper is about, it's also more than that. The thesis states the position the writer will take on a subject. So, in stating the thesis of this program so far, you could say, knowing how to properly research a subject and prepare a bibliography are necessary and important steps in starting a good research paper. Notice the difference between the first statement we made about today's program and the last one. The first sentence is a statement of fact. It's a statement which can't be argued. But the second sentence, that knowing this information is necessary and important to writing a good paper, is opinion. And as opinion, it is an arguable idea which must be supported by further evidence. That is a thesis. At this stage in your research gathering, it is still too early to state a final thesis for your paper. So your initial thesis will be a tentative one. You can expect, as you read through your research and do more thinking on the subject, that your thesis might change or be altered slightly. But writing a preliminary thesis will help you further focus your research and help you weed out what is essential information and what isn't. Think of your preliminary thesis as an hypothesis in a lab experiment. It is the unproven assumption which will guide your investigation. Remember that a thesis must be developed around an arguable point. Therefore, if you find more than one opinion voiced in your research, you will know that you are on the right track. The more you read about your subject, the more you will probably be drawn to one particular point of view. Construct your working thesis to reflect that opinion or angle. There are some specific rules for writing a thesis that you will need to follow. First of all, a thesis is stated in the form of a single declarative sentence. It is never expressed in the form of a question. Therefore, neither of the following sentences, as they stand now, could be considered as a thesis for a paper.
Do skateboarders pose a hazard to pedestrians? Should students be required to attend study hall in college?
To make either of these statements into the thesis for a paper, you would have to turn the question into an arguable statement.
Skateboarders pose a hazard to pedestrians when they recklessly perform stunts on sidewalks and streets. College students are mature enough to do without required study halls.
The second rule in writing a thesis is that it cannot be a statement of fact. Rather, it must make a statement about the facts. Consider, for example, the following sentence.
Every morning, when the paper plant blows its stacks, a foul odor results.
This is an indisputable statement. How can you write a paper about this? There's not much more you can say on the topic. However, if we were to alter the thought somewhat and say,
the foul emissions caused by paper plants blowing their stacks are slowly killing and injuring the people of the city.
Then we have a statement which can be argued either way. This sentence makes a statement about the fact. It says the emissions are harmful. This is therefore a sound thesis for a research paper. While a thesis takes an arguable stand on a subject, it does not express an unsupportable personal opinion. Here then is the third rule about formulating a thesis. You must be able to prove your point with solid facts. Consider these statements.
Pigeons are disgusting birds. Sunbathing is obscene. All movie stars are immoral.
While you may have anecdotes you can cite to support such personal convictions, there is no hard evidence to back up a biased statement. Lacking such factual information produces ineffective research papers.
Pigeons have annoying habits. They should be kept out of public places. Sunbathers today wear such skimpy outfits, they would be arrested for indecent exposure by yesterday's standards. The morality of most movie stars is much more extreme than that of the average American.
The fourth principle to keep in mind when writing a thesis is that it should be precise. It should communicate exactly what the essay will deal with and avoid language that is too broad or too vague. Words such as interesting or nice or good create a statement that lacks precision. For example,
the large sums of money to be made from dealing drugs creates an interesting problem for communities.
The sentence is too general this way. The terms large sums and interesting problems are vague. A better way to state the same idea with more precision might be,
the gold jewelry and expensive cars which drug dealers flaunt attract even children to this illegal billion-dollar industry.
This sentence makes it clear how large sums of money is. It's a billion-dollar industry. And it also tells you what kind of interesting problem results. Children are becoming drug dealers. The fifth and final principle to keep in mind when framing a thesis is that it must be limited. That is, a thesis must be specific enough and present an idea manageable enough to guide the length and scope of the research paper. For example, no one could treat the broad subject of computers in a single paper, nor could you discuss all of the activities involved in a hospice program, or describe all aspects of the fast food industry. You could probably write a book about all these subjects, but not a paper. So in wording your thesis, avoid using words that might be too broad and all-encompassing. The following sentence is too open-ended and would require you to write far too much on the subject.
The fast food industry is an ideal business.
The word ideal needs to be limited and defined. Ideal for what or for whom?
The fast food industry appeals to those who want to invest in businesses where the demand for their product will always exist.
Now you have a sentence which is more limited in scope, with terms that are easier to define. Let's review what we have just learned about the thesis statement. The thesis must be stated in a single declarative sentence. It must present an arguable point rather than a fact. It must not reflect a personal bias, prejudice, or conviction. It must be precise, and it must be limited in scope. Once you feel comfortable about writing a thesis statement, you're ready to skim your resource materials and begin formulating your thesis. Let's return to the topic we chose earlier for this lesson, photojournalism. As you glance through the articles, jot down any interesting information or questions that might surface. As you read, review the articles, taking notes. When you have finished reading, you might have the following list: ethics in photojournalism, economic aspects of photojournalism, the effects of innovations and technology on photojournalism, war photography. After studying these notes, let's say the two areas that interest you most are ethics in photojournalism and war photography. Your first attempt at writing a thesis that combines these two ideas could sound like this.
Photojournalists record the tragedy of war so that they can elicit sympathy from the public.
Although it is an argumentative statement, your thesis is not quite lively enough, and it isn't precise enough. It doesn't address the issue of recent ethical concerns. So you try again.
Because they are attracted to the tragedies of war, photojournalists try to capture the intensity and pain of battles without regard to their subjects or their subjects' families.
That's more precise, but it's cumbersome and wordy. After much thought and some editing, you manage to rework the thesis into this.
Laying ethics aside, photojournalists capture the agony and intensity of victims of war.
Now you have a sentence which meets all 5 criteria for a good thesis statement. With a working bibliography and a good thesis, you're now ready to move on to step 5, developing a working outline. Next, we'll learn how to write an outline and how to take research notes. You should be able to apply these principles to any subject you approach in the future.